I've never really understood infidelity. It's such a high-risk, low-reward endeavor, yet some people seem to relish it. Take my husband, Frank Spencer, for instance. The first sign something was off came from the smell of smoke on him. Frank doesn't smoke. His social circle consists of well-educated professionals, the kind of people who wouldn't indulge in something as short-sighted as smoking, a fleeting pleasure that ignores the long-term consequences. That night he told me he was meeting someone who didn't smoke either. And yet when Frank came home there was a faint, unmistakable trace of cigarette smoke clinging to him. The strange part? It wasn't on his coat. Not on his pants either. It was only on his undershirt. Now what kind of situation calls for someone to strip down to their underwear and light up a cigarette? The only thing that comes to mind is a cigarette after sex. The front door of our house isn't far from the bathroom. It was 10:30 p.m. and I was standing in front of the mirror, going through my nightly skincare routine. That's when Frank came home. I peeked my head out and greeted him with a smile. "Hi, honey." From over a meter away the sharp scent of smoke hit me. For someone who doesn't smoke, even the faintest whiff is impossible to miss. Seeing the frown on my face, Frank launched into a complaint, almost like a preemptive defense. "Can you believe there are still people selfish enough to smoke in restaurants? The manager should have thrown them out." "Right," I replied, stepping out of the bathroom to make way. "Go take a shower." Frank stripped down completely. He's never been shy about these things. After all, we've been married 10 years and never had kids. He's used to his freedom. He tossed his clothes into the washing machine and walked into the shower. All I had to do was add detergent and press the button. Easy. But earlier that morning I'd thrown in a new denim shirt to wash, and denim always bleeds the first time. Sighing, I pulled everything back out of the washing machine. One by one I started putting the clothes back in, giving my mind a moment to wander. And then, like I was under some sort of spell, I found myself lowering my head and sniffing Frank's clothes. The jacket and shirt? Barely any scent. So it wasn't someone else smoking near him. I sniffed again, closer to the collar and sleeves. Still nothing. Then there was only one piece left. The underwear. I didn't even have to lean in. The smoky smell hit me straight away. My hand froze, holding the fabric. I turned toward the bathroom, my gut sinking. Something wasn't right. Later in bed he was eager. Hungry even. Like a man who hadn't touched a woman in weeks. Married men can be enthusiastic, sure. But this kind of sudden enthusiasm? It's either pent-up desire they've been holding back or the guilty kind trying to mask something. When we were done he lay back, running his hand over his stubbled chin, grinning through heavy breaths. "What's with you tonight? Not in the mood? Rough day at work?" I pulled my head away from the crook of his arm and sighed that I had another divorce case today. Husband was cheating. "I just don't get it. Why do men cheat?" Frank laughed too loudly, too quickly. "Oh, come on. Don't be so black and white about it," he said, his voice unnaturally casual. That laugh of his, so deliberate, only deepened my suspicion. "They're probably missing something in their lives," he added, "so they try to prove they've still got it. Not me though. I've got it all. A great life, a great wife." As if to prove his point, he reached over and tapped my chest with a playful, leering grin. The passion felt staged. Too much effort to seem natural. I played along, flashing a sultry smile in return. Half an hour later his snores filled the room. Under the soft glow of the bedside lamp, I studied his sleeping face. The deepening lines around his mouth, the faint brown spots scattered across his skin, the slightly open mouth emitting a steady stream of noise. This man, so familiar, felt suddenly like a stranger. Frank is the owner of a top-tier newspaper. His status is practically untouchable. When he puts on his serious face, people fall over themselves to appease him. The media and PR crowd practically worship the ground he walks on. Yet, despite the attention and power, there's never been so much as a whisper of scandal around him. As he likes to say, the more successful a man is, the more he must guard his reputation. I've never agreed with that sentiment. It's illogical. I've heard men declare things like, "When I make it big, I'm gonna tour from Thailand to Amsterdam, sleeping with everyone I can. Leave my mark on Eurasia." Success and guarding one's reputation have little to do with each other. I brushed the back of my hand against Frank's face and softly called his name. Frank. No response. If this were a few years ago I might have adjusted his pillow, tucked the blanket around him, and fallen asleep listening to his snores. But now lying next to him felt like being parked beside an old steam train, with the whistle shrieking every 2 seconds. I got out of bed, threw on a robe and picked up Frank's phone. As a senior partner at a law firm, I've handled countless cases of infidelity. Digging through a man's secrets on his phone? It's practically muscle memory at this point. First, I silenced his phone to avoid any incriminating sounds. Then I entered his passcode. The screen lit up instantly. I tiptoed to the study. Social media accounts. A waste of time. Those rarely contain real evidence. I went straight to settings, then privacy, then location services. From there, system services, and finally significant locations. A map appeared on the screen, followed by line after line of location history. Everywhere had been. When he arrived, how long he stayed. It was all there, laid out in perfect detail. My fingers trembled as I scrolled. A mix of dread and anticipation churned in my chest, making my heart race. And then I saw it. 42 ND Street, number 106. According to his phone, Frank had been there almost every day, including tonight from 7 p.m. to 9:40 p.m. His location didn't change once during that time. Unless had lost his phone, there was only one explanation. Frank was there too. We live in the east end of the city. His office is in the west. But this place? It's in the south by the waterfront. The kind of place that doesn't explain a smoky scent on someone's underwear. It screams it. Out of curiosity, I searched the address online. New builds. High property values. Ocean views and floor-to-ceiling windows. The area had no offices. Just a nearly completed shopping mall and very few restaurants, none of them good. Secluded, isolated. The person Frank claimed to meet tonight didn't live there either. I had what I needed. But I still opened his messages. Frank is too proud to bother with things like deleting chat histories. He's the type who thinks erasing messages is beneath him. Sure enough, the conversations were intact. There's a strange thing about women. When it comes to combing through their husband's phone, it's like they've unlocked a superhuman ability to speed read. Ignoring the endless stream of baby, miss you and love you most, I zeroed in on the conversations from the past month. And there I was, the main topic of a 10-minute exchange. When I finished reading, I took pictures of every damning message on the screen, one by one. Then I turned off the phone, walked back to the bedroom as quietly as possible, and placed it exactly where I'd found it. Standing over Frank, I felt a strange sense of detachment. There he was, sound asleep. The deep grooves around his mouth, the slight gray at his temples, the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest. Frank, I whispered silently, as if he could hear me. Do you even know what you're doing? The year I met Frank, I was a sophomore in college and he was a senior. I was an unremarkable law student while he was a star in the philosophy department. Professors hailed him as an ensonadique talent. He truly was brilliant. Articulate and insightful, his articles in the campus newspaper were sharp and thought-provoking. And the ivory tower of academia. A single halo of brilliance could overshadow every flaw. Frank became the crown jewel of the campus dating scene, the unattainable prize. I, on the other hand, was invisible. Though he was the one who pursued me to everyone else, it looked like I'd climbed far above my station. At the time I believed it too. Frank made me feel enveloped in romance. On every birthday, every holiday, he'd plan extravagant surprises just for me. Even after we married, he never let those romantic gestures slip. Over time, I opened my own law firm and became what people called a successful boss. My income steadily climbed, eventually catching up to Frank's. The whispers of me marrying up gradually faded. Frank never said much about it, but I could tell it bothered him. Once I'd told him, let's not have kids, okay? Head smiled and replied, of course. You'll always be the baby of this family. But the sweet words stopped. When his parents pressed him about children, he'd occasionally snap and take it out on me with sharp comments. So I started tiptoeing around, trying to preserve our marriage. I carefully shielded his ego. Even as my income surpassed his, I never told him. In his mind, I still earned less. And I let him believe it. I thought that managing things this way would ensure the longevity of our relationship. But life is ruled by Murphy's Law. The more cautious you are, the bigger the disaster when things fall apart. One perk of running a law firm is access to resources and connections. Right now, on my desk, sat a photocopy of a lease agreement signed under Frank's name. A 1-year lease. Paid 3 months up front. Next to it were photographs of Frank entering and leaving an apartment with a young woman. Frank was having an affair with a college girl. The woman in the pictures had wavy, chestnut-colored hair that glinted with a soft rose tint under the sunlight. Her smile radiated happiness. In one photo, she wore a puff-sleeve top, a figure-hugging skirt, and strappy high heels that made her half a head taller than Frank. Frank stood beside her, looking every bit the accomplished man, a faintly smug expression on his face. Her name was Selena. She'd just graduated and was interning at Frank's newspaper as an editorial assistant. A superior and a subordinate. A dynamic ripe for this kind of foolish entanglement. I end these situations. The boss is predatory, and the intern is naive. I stared at the photos, my thoughts spinning, when a notification pulled me back to reality. Having a meeting at the paper today. Might be home late. It was a message from Frank. I glanced at the confident man in the photos, then back at my phone, where a single dismissive sentence summed up his entire interaction with me. Disgust bubbled up inside me. Not a trace of guilt. No fear of being caught. Just arrogance. I stared at my phone for a long moment before replying with a simple, okay. The Ocean View apartment was about 20 kilometers from my office. After work it took me half an hour to drive there. By then the sun had long set. The complex was mostly dark with only a few lit windows, a sign that occupancy was still low. The window I was watching remained pitch black. I stayed in the car, continuing to read a newly issued set of laws I hadn't had time to finish earlier. Being a lawyer means you're always chasing new knowledge, and I was only halfway through the third section. The thought of my evening study schedule being disrupted made irritation bubble up inside me. Why do adults insist on doing things that create needless trouble for others? After about 30 minutes, the window finally lit up. I put my book aside, locked the car, and headed upstairs. I knocked on the door. 3 knocks, then 3 more. No answer. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to hope. Then the door opened. A young woman stood in front of me, looking just as she did in the photos. And just like that, any chance of denial disappeared. She had a delicate nose and deep, soft eyes. Her bangs framed her face perfectly, and her makeup was immaculate. In person she exuded the kind of radiant youthfulness that no photograph could fully capture. But her reality shattered the illusion. The pajama set she was wearing, the slippers on her feet, and the cloying, sickly sweet perfume that hung in the air, her choices, her consumption, spoke volumes about who she was. Such a beautiful girl, living in such modest circumstances. I almost felt sorry for her. The moment she saw me she froze. Her carefully crafted expression faltered, and her face turned pale. I smiled and stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. The living room was spacious, easily over 30 square meters. The furnishings were far more upscale than what she wore, creating an odd disconnect. On the coffee table sat an open Tiffany box. Inside was a double heart pendant necklace, the classic silver and blue design. It looked like it had just been tried on. Seeing it, I instantly understood Selena's value in Frank's eyes. Yes, Tiffany is expensive, but this particular necklace is one of their entry-level pieces. Not that expensive. I took a slow tour around the room before stopping by the floor-to-ceiling window. From there I could see the ocean, framed by streetlights stretching into the distance. After a long day at work, a view like this could be soothing. Frank must have loved standing here, enjoying the scenery while indulging in whatever he did. The thought made me chuckle. Why am I empathizing with him? Frank emerged from the bathroom a moment later. The sight of me stopped him in his tracks. For a brief second, his expression betrayed him. Then he forced himself back to calm. I said nothing, just stared at him. He was wearing a dark blue robe that reached past his knees. His damp leg hair clung to his skin in uneven clumps. How considerate of him to wear a robe for the new girl with me. Had often lounge around with nothing but a towel, or sometimes, not even that. But for her he kept a layer of mystery. Frank approached, his face carefully composed, but when he opened his mouth to speak the words wouldn't come. His jaw worked soundlessly for a moment before he turned his head, as if the situation was beneath him to explain. The girl, however, had no such hesitation. She stepped forward, speaking for him with surprising confidence. "Olivia," she said. The sound of my name startled me for a moment. She knew who I was. Clearly she'd known for a while. I met her gaze. And for the first time I saw it, defiance. She wasn't scared. She was challenging me. I stared back, unflinching. I didn't speak. Didn't react. Just held her gaze until her composure cracked. She squirmed, her hands fidgeting awkwardly. Only then did I relent. I end negotiations. Dominating the room early is key to a swift victory. Selena eventually stepped away, retreating into the kitchen. When she returned, she carried a fruit platter, holding out a freshly peeled apple with an air of nonchalance. "Would you like some apple?" she asked, her voice soft but pointed. As if mocking me, I ignored her completely. I wasn't here for her. My target was Frank. 10 minutes passed. And still Frank said nothing. Selena's performance dragged on, switching between Act 1 and Act 2 of her one-woman play. Finally, Frank mustered the courage to break the silence. "Selena had some issues at work," he began, his voice stiff. "After the meeting, she asked if I could help her sort things out. It was the kind of excuse only someone used to lying would give. Weak. Contrived. And he said it anyway. I dropped my imposing demeanor in response to Frank's weak excuse. Instead of arguing, I lowered my head and said softly, "All right." Frank froze, caught off guard. I repeated myself. "All right." We'd been married long enough for him to know me. He knew I never spoke without reason, and now his mind must have been spinning. "Someone told me they saw you with a young girl, pulling at each other in the street," I said, my voice trembling slightly. I didn't believe them. I told them Frank and I are fine. We love each other. But now, here we are. Tears welled up in my eyes, and before I could stop them, they began to fall. I wasn't the kind of woman to cry, not in front of anyone, and certainly not for Frank. Seeing me like this clearly shook him. His confident expression faltered, and he stepped closer, attempting to console me. "Darling, let's go home," he said gently. "We can talk about this there." That word, darling, made Selena shift uncomfortably. Her expression betrayed a flicker of unease. And that was exactly my plan. Frank is a textbook patriarch, quick to protect the weak and scorn the strong. Had always felt the need to shelter women he considered fragile and dependent, while criticizing those who were independent and capable. So tonight I played my role carefully. I weaponized his instinct to protect, turning his own bias into a tool against him. Selena didn't understand the sudden shift in power dynamics. She tried again to provoke me. "Olivia, don't be upset, it's all my fault," she said. Her voice quivering with fake remorse, her eyes glistening with tears. She even glanced at Frank for support, the perfect picture of helplessness. I'd seen this performance countless times before. Women like her, playing the role of the pitiable victim, gaining short-term sympathy while sacrificing long-term strength. I ignored her completely and turned to Frank. "Frank," I said, my voice breaking. "I think I understand why this happened. But we've been married for so many years. I just don't know how to move forward with you anymore." I wiped away another tear and let out a trembling sigh. "You've betrayed me." With that, I stood, grabbed my bag, and walked quickly to the door. I left without looking back. The first lesson I ever learned about human duality came from Frank. In his youth, he dazzled everyone with his charisma and brilliance, but behind closed doors he was a hypocrite. He scorned countless people and things, all while pretending to be morally superior. He only ever acted when he was certain he'd succeed. A cautious coward, wrapped in a cloak of confidence. Tonight, my purpose in that apartment wasn't just to confront his betrayal. It was to observe the dynamics between him and Selena. To study the value they placed on each other and how they presented their relationship. Most importantly, I needed to play my part, the heartbroken wife, devastated by her husband's infidelity. Act 1 was complete. I parked by the ocean, under a street lamp, and rolled down the window. The cool air helped clear my head as I pulled out my legal texts. Disrupting tonight's schedule would only throw off tomorrow's as well. The dense language of the statutes didn't help. I read through the sections, but my stomach churned with nausea, not from the text, but from what I'd just witnessed. I wanted nothing more than to slap them both. Instead, I'd been forced to act fragile, to put on a show of pain and helplessness. It took me 4 hours to calm down enough to drive home. The house was brightly lit when I arrived. Frank sat in the middle of the couch, his face grim, waiting. I walked past him without a word and went to change. "Olivia," he called out, his voice heavy with false concern. "We need to talk." He frowned as if genuinely worried about me. Then he began his apology. He told me had been wrong. That I'd been wrong. That our marriage, society, everything was wrong. "And you," he added, "you're wrong too. We've been married for 10 years. And we still don't have a child. My parents are desperate. They've been pressuring me constantly. I asked you to see a doctor, but you refused. You said marriage doesn't need children to hold it together. But I need a child. I've been carrying all this pressure for years because I love you. But this constant sacrifice, it's exhausting." I'd heard this speech before, almost word for word. Frank had said the same things to Selena in their messages. Had painted me as the villain in his story, a flawed wife who couldn't give him what he needed, making him the tragic hero of our marriage. Listening to him now, I almost felt like the affair was my fault. That ID pushed him into Selena's arms. It's a common tactic among the arrogant. Deflect blame by raising unrelated grievances. No children? We could have adopted. Tried IVF. There were options. No children? You wanted someone else to have one for you, so why have an affair with a young girl instead of finding a surrogate? No children? It wasn't my fault. I looked at Frank, my mind filled with a whirlwind of anger and logic. But what came out of my mouth was different. I understand how you feel, I said slowly. These years without a child. They've been hard for me too. If you need to do this, then do it. I have no choice. ID carefully rehearsed these lines, writing them out to make sure they said just enough without committing to anything. Frank stared at me, surprised. But then his expression shifted. He rationalized my response, pinning it to the flaw he believed I carried. After all, as Head told Selena, Olivia hasn't given me a child in 10 years. What right does she have to demand anything of me? People who are indecisive and duplicitous like Frank often require a little encouragement to take the next step. Saturday was the day of Frank's monthly social gathering, a mix of networking and ostentatious performance. The guest list consisted of socially prominent individuals, all arriving dressed to impress and bearing carefully chosen gifts. Fine tea sets, vintage wines, elegant vases. His hosts, Frank and I dutifully made our rounds, exchanging pleasantries laced with polite insincerity. Before long, the crowd transitioned into its true form, a stage for veiled barbs cloaked in compliments that we could make 10 times what we do and still not reach Mr. Spencer's level. Someone remarked, their smile overly bright. I ran into him the other day walking with a young lady. For a moment I thought it was his wife, said Gray, reclining casually in his chair, his arms outstretched in mock ease. But Olivia doesn't have dyed hair, does she? His tone was light, but the challenge in his words was unmistakable. Gray was an old rival of Frank's, his business recently saved by a stroke of luck. A spike in precious metal prices had turned his failing factory's silver equipment into a small fortune. Had always despised Frank's polished exterior, viewing him as a pretentious fraud, and now that he had the means to compete, he wasn't about to waste the opportunity. Frank's face darkened, though he maintained a rigid composure. Internally I could sense the simmering fury. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Most of the guests avoided eye contact, suddenly finding excuses to busy themselves. A few, however, couldn't resist stealing glances at Frank and more notably at me, waiting for my reaction. I placed my wine glass on the table and smiled serenely at the group. Mr. Gray must have seen my cousin, I said lightly. I recently arranged for her to intern under Frank. She does resemble me from behind, easily mistaken. The guests exchanged curious looks, interest piqued. Gray raised his eyebrows in mock surprise, clearly unimpressed by my explanation but unwilling to challenge it outright. I knew what Gray had likely witnessed was far more than a casual stroll. The specifics of what had seen, perhaps an intimate touch or an unmistakable gesture, were written all over his face. Frank, quick on the uptake, followed my lead with a laugh. Gray, you really do have a vivid imagination. The guests, sensing the shift, joined in with polite laughter and the conversation moved on. Frank shot me a quick look, part gratitude, part something else entirely. I had preserved his fragile public persona, his carefully curated facade. I wondered if he recognized the effort behind my sincerity. The apartment complex on 42nd Street was a newly developed property, with many units still unoccupied or listed for rent. The same day I contacted an agent, I secured a unit directly across from Selena and Frank's. With a clear view of their floor-to-ceiling windows, I arranged the space meticulously. Near the window I placed 2 large potted plants, their broad leaves perfectly positioned to conceal the surveillance camera nestled among them. The camera faced their window directly, capturing everything in sharp detail. Living in this complex, I made it a point to integrate into the community. I cultivated relationships with neighbors, subtly turning some into unwitting informants. After a couple of weeks, a particular neighbor caught my attention. His name was David. David was the epitome of ostentatious wealth. He loved flaunting his status and seemed to thrive on attention. Once I obtained his contact information, I began piecing together his personality through his social media. His profile picture was a sunglasses-clad selfie at the beach. His latest post. Posing next to an Audi R8. Every post was a variation on the same theme. Hands gripping a steering wheel with the logo prominently displayed, nightclub escapades surrounded by women, or luxurious poolside scenes. It didn't take long to profile him. David was a trust fund baby. Energetic, arrogant, and predatory. One detail in his posts stood out. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evening he checked in at a high-end swimming club near the apartment complex. Captions ranged from 2,000 meters. New record pace. To exhausted from swimming. But the poolside view is worth it. David was exactly the type of person I needed. People only see what they want to see. And no matter how many reasons I have not to let Frank off the hook, as long as I continue playing the vulnerable wife, hell believe it. He adores women cast in that role, helpless, compliant, needing his protection. Over time his guard around me has dropped completely. He's even started mentioning Selena in casual conversation. In his telling, she's a diligent, hard-working girl from a remote, underprivileged town with many siblings and little financial support. A girl like her, he said once, why should she have to suffer like that? I turned my face to grab the TV remote, hiding the smirk threatening to curl my lips. So you came to the rescue? I teased, keeping my tone light. I just thought if she needs help I should offer it. For a split second my smile faltered. In my mind I scoffed. If you want to sleep with her, just admit it. At least then you'd have the decency to face your own desires like a man. I leaned closer and placed my hand gently over his, resting on his knee. You've always been so kind, I said softly. When I first started out I was just as lost. I was lucky to have you by my side. Frank's face lit up, clearly pleased with my words. He kissed my forehead, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. Frank, I continued, looking up at him with what I knew was just the right mix of adoration and sincerity. I just want to take care of you forever. Darling, he murmured, pulling me close and kissing me. That night, Frank was particularly enthusiastic. I know far more about Selena than Frank does. Alongside the rental agreement and surveillance photos, my desk holds her background report, a dossier detailing the life of a professional mistress. If there's no official term for it, I might as well claim it as my invention. A college freshman, Selena latched onto a small business owner, a pudgy man with ill-fitting suits and garish floral shirts. Just looking at him would make most people lose interest in the opposite sex entirely, but Selena endured it. Senior year, she had moved on to her second man, again much older than her. This time she pushed his wife to divorce him, managing to siphon tens of thousands of dollars in under a year. But the money wasn't for her. Every cent she earned or extorted was wired to her family. Each transfer meticulously logged in her bank statements. For her, this was a strategy, not indulgence. Meanwhile, Frank remained oblivious to what I was doing. He trusted me too much to suspect anything, even as I quietly began shifting assets. The income Frank didn't know about, I moved it into accounts under my parents' names. The income he might suspect but couldn't quantify, I reallocated it under new designations. My parents knew exactly what I was doing. They didn't question me, didn't stop me. They simply reminded me not to push Frank too hard. But then there was Selena's bank statement. Those transfers to her family, each one a testament to her calculated self-sacrifice. I found myself hesitating. For a moment I wondered, am I any different from her? Selena approached me just as I was beginning to waver. Lately, Frank's parents had been relentless about the topic of children. Unlike before when I would politely deflect, this time I shut them down outright. They didn't take it well. They called Frank immediately, warning him to stop letting Olivia hold you back and to give us a grandchild, no matter what. Frank, having misinterpreted my calculated words as permission, had naturally shared this with Selena. So, Selena reached out and invited me to meet at a cafe near my office. The moment she sat down she got straight to the point. Olivia, Frank said you told him to have me give him a child. Her bluntness didn't surprise me. Frank and I had been married long enough for him to understand the meaning behind my words, and I had no doubt he relayed them to her. But Selena's intentions for this meeting were far from innocent. I noticed immediately that her phone wasn't on the table. She was recording. Amateur, I thought. Couldn't even be bothered to use a proper recording device. Unlike her, I came prepared. The discreet recorder in my pocket was smaller and far more effective. I smiled calmly. I never said that. Selena froze, momentarily thrown off balance. I seized the opportunity. Frank wants you to have his child? I asked, feigning curiosity. Yes. She blurted too quickly. And what do you think about that? I'm still so young. How can I just casually have a child? Casually, the word struck me. I understood what she meant. I am sure Frank wouldn't expect you to go through all that trouble for nothing, I said, gently steering the conversation. Her true motives were transparent. From the moment she walked in and accused me, this had always been about negotiating her price. She thought I'd made a demand and now she wanted me to pay for it. But I hadn't made any demands. Still, as soon as I shifted the topic back to money, Selena eagerly followed my lead. Did he said he'd give me $300,000 if I did it, she said. Well, I replied with a soft smile. That hardly seems casual anymore, does it? But I'm so young. Just $300,000 for something like this? She exclaimed. Frustration creeping into her voice. Her desperation mixed with greed filled me with equal parts disgust and pity. What do you need that much money for? I asked, giving her an opening to explain her struggles, to perhaps take a different path. Had she been willing to share her hardships and walk away from Frank, I might have offered her the money myself. But she didn't. Instead, she escalated, her voice rising loud enough to draw stares from nearby tables. You can't have kids and now you want me to do it for you, put me through hell, and you won't even pay me properly? Her words echoed in the cafe. Strangers glanced our way, curious and judgmental. This wasn't just about children. It was about power. Selena and Frank both believed they had the upper hand because I couldn't have children, and they saw that as leverage to corner me into submission. For a moment I had been foolish enough to pity her. What a mistake! That I stood abruptly, ending the conversation. When a woman abandons all sympathy and commits fully to her plans, she can be merciless. As we left the cafe, Selena finally pulled out her phone, ending the recording. She thought it was over. It wasn't. I led her to an open area outside, then shifted into a tone of feigned vulnerability, my words laced with calculated bitterness. Women, I said almost to myself. We can never escape it, can we? Have a child and men take none of the burden. Don't have one and men lay all the blame. It's absurd. Selena was caught off guard by the sudden intimacy of my words and stayed silent. Frank, I continued, shaking my head as if in disbelief. He really had the audacity to offer you just $300,000? As if women are worth so little. Just like he's treated me all these years. Selena hesitated, sensing the shift in tone but unsure how to respond. Look, I said, sighing deeply as if resigned. Whether you have the child or not is your decision. Your body, your choice. But if you do decide to go through with it, I'm willing to give you and the child another $300,000 privately. Consider it compensation for the suffering you'd endure on my behalf. Her eyes widened, practically sparkling at the mention of the additional money, but she quickly tried to mask her eagerness, forcing a neutral expression. How do I know you'll keep your word? She asked, her tone both wary and hopeful. Selena, I said, my voice firm, you're misunderstanding something. This isn't about me owing you anything. It's about me recognizing your pain as a woman, nothing more. With that, I ended the conversation and walked away, leaving her to process my words. Selena would need time to think, to weigh her options. I had planted the seed. Now I would wait for it to grow. As people age, they learn to trust experience and intuition more. Lately, my parents' words, don't push Frank too hard, have been echoing in my mind. Stopping my plan now would still be possible, but it would be as monumental a decision as starting it was. Before making that choice, I needed every piece of data, every bit of evidence, analyzed and compared. So, I retrieved the recording device I had planted in Frank's car weeks ago. It didn't take long to uncover the truth. In less than 2 weeks, Frank had had sex with Selena in the same car we used to take our parents out for family outings. The realization hit me so hard I nearly bolted out the door to buy a new car immediately. What the hell? It took several deep breaths and a long moment with the headphones off before I could regain my composure. For hours I listened to the recordings. Their conversations erased any hesitation I had about following through with my plan. These two didn't deserve mercy. Will you divorce her? Selena's voice was sweet, with an undercurrent of manipulation. That's not something I can decide right away, Frank replied, deflecting as always. Then I won't have your child. Frank laughed, his voice dripping with condescension. You're too cute. If I move just right, you'll be having my baby whether you want to or not. Her playful response was lost beneath the sounds of physical intimacy that followed. Later, their voices returned. She's a lawyer. If you divorce her, wouldn't that mean you walk away with nothing? I heard lawyers can strip their spouses clean. Frank snorted. Her? Please. She's had that partner title for years, but her earnings are less than half of mine. She's never handled any major cases. At her level. How could she make me leave with nothing? Still, you should be careful. She seems pretty smart. Oh, don't worry about that. I've got it all figured out. I trust you. You're my fortress. If she tries to file for divorce, I've got plenty of ways to ruin her. Destroying a woman's reputation? Easy. What do you mean? She goes to all those galas and events, doesn't she? Plenty of men around. You think she's never made a mistake? You think she's cheated? Even if she hasn't, I can always make it look like she has. The recordings were safely stored on an external hard drive. Any lingering doubt was gone. My decision was clear. I was going to make them pay. That afternoon, I had my assistant purchase a membership card for the upscale swimming club near Selena and Frank's apartment. We sent it to Selena, disguised as a free trial pass. From then on, every Monday, Wednesday and Friday, the days David frequented the club, I ensured Frank was either stuck at home or tied up at some social event. For a week, nothing happened. Then, during the second week, something shifted. On Wednesday night, David posted a new photo on Instagram. It featured a woman in a ribbed white bikini, her upper body resting against the edge of the pool. The photo didn't show her face, only her tanned arms and shoulders, but the long rose-pink hair cascading over her shoulders. I recognized it instantly. Selena.by Friday night, Frank was at home, tidying the bookshelves for once. It seemed no one was vying for his attention tonight. I checked the surveillance footage connected to my phone. Through the large, uncovered window of Selena's apartment, I saw her locked in a heated embrace with David. The two of them wasted no time, their actions growing more passionate by the second. Selena's expressions, her head thrown back, her hands gripping wildly at David, were far more genuine than anything I'd ever seen when she was with Frank. Meanwhile, in the study, Frank was carefully placing a book back on the shelf, entirely oblivious. I glanced between the screen and the man in the other room. Perfect. I end the days that followed. Frank's schedule grew noticeably lighter. He seemed to have all the time in the world, while Selena became increasingly busy. I made a point of reviewing every moment of her encounters with David that I managed to capture, watching without skipping a single frame. I had no way of knowing whether Selena was taking birth control, but based on what Frank had once casually mentioned about her menstrual cycle, it didn't seem irregular. Which likely meant she wasn't taking any precautions. One evening, Frank called me to the dining table. He poured me a glass of water, his expression grave and resolute. I've decided to have Selena carry my child, he said. This wasn't a suggestion or a request, it was a declaration. Was Selena already pregnant? I didn't answer, and Frank continued. My parents are on board with it, he added, trying to reassure me. Olivia, don't worry. We've been together since college. You're the woman I love the most, and I'll always spend my life with you. I lowered my head, gripping the glass in my hands, keeping my expression neutral. Frank thought he was informing me about the beginning of Selena's pregnancy journey. But I already knew more than he could imagine. That stunning floor-to-ceiling window view seemed to be irresistible. None of the men involved liked drawing the curtains, which made it all too easy for me to capture every moment. Frank and Selena's latest tryst had been particularly revealing. The first round barely lasted 10 minutes. Compared to David, Frank's performance was pitiful. Selena didn't even flinch, let alone show any signs of pleasure. Undeterred, Selena initiated a second round. The next morning, there was even a third. Frank trudged off to work at the paper afterward. Hunched and exhausted, looking every bit the worn-out fool. But he was beaming. Something strange happened after that night. David vanished from the view of the floor-to-ceiling windows. Checking his Instagram, I discovered he had started swimming at a different club. Coupled with Selena's recent insatiable demands, it didn't take long to piece together the truth that if David had simply grown bored of her, he wouldn't have gone to such lengths to avoid her. The only plausible explanation was that Selena had told him she was pregnant, and he wanted no part of it. With David out of the picture, Selena had pivoted to her backup plan. Frank I wasn't particularly interested in the specifics of Selena and David's fallout. My focus was elsewhere, on the most important detail of all. A little over a month later, Selena called me. I am pregnant, she said, her voice a mix of nervousness and excitement. All right, I replied evenly. Send me your prenatal test results. Okay. That evening Frank came home reeking of alcohol. His demeanor was similar to Selena's, hesitant, but with an undercurrent of elation. Later, as he lay in bed, he lit a cigarette. No one in this house had ever smoked before. The smell alone was enough to drive me into another room. Frank was so overjoyed he let the ashes fall onto his pillow, starting a small fire that burned his shoulder. Watching him flail and pat at the flames, I had to fight to keep from laughing. What a fool. When I came home that evening, I found Selena sitting on the leather sofa I had chosen myself. In front of her was a plate of neatly cut fruit. Frank didn't offer a single explanation for her presence. But Selena was sharper than Frank. Seeing me, she quickly stood up, careful not to display any arrogance. After all, as long as the $300,000 I had casually promised remained unpaid, she knew to tread cautiously around me. See how respectful Selena is to you, Frank said, his tone carrying a hint of reproach, as if I were the one being unreasonable. I almost laughed. Yes, very considerate, I replied lightly before heading to the bedroom. Why now? Frank's pride was through the roof. He must have thought he was the epitome of success. A man with a high-status, tolerant wife and a young, beautiful mistress willing to bear his child without demanding a title. The living room could stay with this patchwork family. I had my own work to do. I sat at my desk, reviewing the detailed breakdown of our assets. Everything checked out. Aside from what I had already secured and converted into fixed assets, Frank's remaining wealth, stocks, funds, and insurance, amounted to less than $4 million. Among his stock holdings was a significant investment in Hermes, which had steadily grown in value over the years. It was now worth close to $800,000. Frank had bought it 3 years into our marriage, declaring at the time buying handbags is too cliché. I'd rather buy you shares. I'd been ecstatic back then, smitten with his bold and unconventional gesture of romance. But now that same romance felt grotesque, its charm twisted into a bitter reminder of what had been. The next monthly business gathering arrived. This time, the crowd was larger and Frank was ecstatic, his energy contagious. When people are in such high spirits, they crave attention, revel in celebrations and seek validation. Selena was present too, dressed in a white gown Frank had undoubtedly picked out for her. Frank himself wore a white suit, the crisp tailoring enhancing his posture and giving him an air of confidence. But under the harsh lights, that pristine white also emphasized the wrinkles on his face and the sunspots scattered across his skin. Standing together, Selena and Frank looked like a matching set. Well, at least if you ignored their faces. It didn't take much to grasp Frank's intent. He was preparing to formally introduce Selena to his circle. He hadn't consulted me or even hinted at his plans. I had been rendered invisible, a nonentity. As guests arrived, Selena sat on the sofa with a mix of nervousness and anticipation, while Frank flitted around the room, radiating joy. I stood off to the side, observing. The scene made my thoughts drift. I was eager to destroy them both, yet I hesitated. If I made my move now, Frank's reputation would be obliterated before the night was over. But was I ready to push him to the brink? I wondered if I was simply too soft-hearted, too hesitant to act with true decisiveness. I decided to give them one more chance. I had already done so twice before, each time ending in disappointment. But procedural justice demands patience. And as they say, the third time's the charm. Frank leaned against the piano, surveying the gradually filling room with satisfaction. I walked over to join him, my hand instinctively lifting the piano cover. It had been a long time since I last touched these keys. Without much thought, I played a few notes. So, you're planning to introduce Selena to everyone tonight? My fingers didn't stop. Yes, he replied. How will you introduce her? As family. All right. I continued playing. Olivia, my dear, you're such a tolerant, enlightened woman. You need to keep that high ground. With that, Frank moved into the crowd, his voice rising as he began to talk animatedly with the guests. Not for a moment did he consider my position in this grotesque arrangement. I kept playing, letting the notes flow, but the final, soft chord that should have resolved the melody came out harsh as I pressed it with deliberate force. At dinner, Selena and I flanked Frank, seated on either side of him. Her plate was piled high with food Frank had carefully served her. Mine had nothing but a single spoonful of beans I had helped myself to. The guests, perceptive as ever, took in the scene without a word. They all knew what this arrangement represented. Gray, the same man who had teased Frank at the last gathering, couldn't resist. So, Is this the cousin Olivia mentioned last time? He asked, his tone laden with mockery. Yes, Frank replied, unfazed. Everyone meet Selena, she's family. The word landed heavily on the table, its implications unmistakable. The guests immediately turned their attention to me, curiosity and anticipation brimming in their eyes. What would the wife, the real wife, do in such a humiliating moment? But as the seconds ticked by, I offered nothing. I simply smiled, keeping my silence, my expression giving nothing away. Gray didn't push further, even he knew better than to publicly corner a woman already on the edge. Conversation resumed, though every now and then, someone's gaze lingered on me a moment too long. Then Frank spoke. He was serving Selena more food when he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You're pregnant, you need to eat more." The room fell silent. If eyes could flash like cameras, I'd be blinded by the tension. I didn't react. I continued eating the beans on my plate, their saltiness suddenly more pronounced. Frank was drunk. He wasn't usually a lightweight, but tonight, elated by his triumph, he had overindulged. By the time the bottles were half empty, he was already swaying and slurring his words. "I am happy today," he announced, voice loud and unsteady. In the past, whenever I attended events like this, the people beside me were always multimillionaires, but none of that ever made me truly happy. The guests exchanged uneasy glances at his careless admission, but today Selena is pregnant and I'm happy. As he spoke, he clapped a heavy hand onto my shoulder. "Olivia, we've been married for years and I love you, but you can't have children. I'm desperate. A woman, how can a woman not give birth?" The slap landed hard and for a moment I felt real pain. But it was nothing compared to the ache of the decision I made in that moment. As his hand fell, I lowered my head, letting my hair fall to either side, obscuring my face. Behind the curtain of hair, my expression remained hidden, even as my resolve solidified into something unyielding. Frank had crossed the line. Frank, oblivious to the chaos he was about to unleash, continued sharing his joy. "Darling, Selena will be part of our family now," he said, his voice brimming with pride. "She's carrying my child. Together we'll welcome him into this world." The room was dead silent. The men exchanged awkward glances, clearly uncomfortable. The women, on the other hand, looked at Frank like he was an absolute lunatic. But I didn't care about their reactions, because Frank had said the words I'd been waiting for. And I finally could lift my head. I raised my eyes. My face no longer the mask of indifference I had worn all night. Instead, I put on an expression of pure, unfiltered shock. "What?" My voice was loud enough to stop every conversation in the room. All eyes turned to me, watching intently as the drama unfolded. The air in the room grew so tense that even the ticking of a watch could be heard. Frank looked at me, confused, as if trying to understand why I was reacting so strongly. "You're saying Selena is carrying your child?" I asked, my voice trembling with disbelief. Selena's face paled. She must have realized that the control she thought she had was slipping away. Frank, sluggish from alcohol, nodded dumbly. "Yes, why?" I stared at him, my lips quivering as if I were trying to form words but couldn't quite get them out. Then I turned to the guests, shaking my head as though trying to process what I had just heard. How is that possible?" I shifted my gaze back to Frank, my voice breaking with emotion. "Frank." Tears welled up in my eyes as I delivered the final blow. "You have azoospermia." The room exploded in stunned silence. It was the kind of silence so loud it seemed to echo. Every guest sat frozen, their eyes wide, their faces frozen in shock as they absorbed my words. Frank, still woozy from the alcohol, blinked at me, his mind slowly catching up to what I had just said. The first to react was Selena. Her hands clenched into fists, resting stiffly on her thighs. The realization was dawning on her too. When Frank and I had just gotten married, we'd gone for a routine fertility check. I had gone to pick up the results alone because Frank had an important interview. My report was perfect. Everything was in order. But Frank's report told a different story. The numbers were devastating. Total sperm count? 0. Motility? Non-existent. I had stared at that report in disbelief, unable to reconcile the elegant, confident Frank with the harsh reality of those results. And I couldn't bear to imagine how Frank would react if he saw them. So I switched the reports. I had kept his azoospermia a secret all these years. Until now. Frank slammed his glass onto the table, shattering it against the floor. "What did you just say?" His voice roared through the room, louder than I'd ever heard in all the years we'd been together. 3 minutes had passed since I dropped the bombshell, And Frank's drunken mind had finally pieced it all together. The years of guilt he had never carried. The arrogance he had never questioned, it all clicked into place that he knew I wasn't lying. He knew I had protected him all this time. The guests, still stunned, turned their attention back to me, waiting for me to respond that I kept my composure. "Frank," I said softly with a hint of resignation. "You should go get tested. Let's stop your parents from blaming me any longer." That I cast a quick glance at Selena, then back to Frank, my face filled with disappointment. "Don't let them keep accusing me of something that isn't my fault." And with that I lowered my head again, letting my hair shield my face from the curious gazes of the crowd. Frank's face twisted with fury. "Selena," he bellowed, grabbing her arm and dragging her into another room, slamming and locking the door behind him. That I sat there, still and composed, though every fiber of my being buzzed with victory. Even now I kept my head bowed, my face carefully neutral, that I couldn't let the triumph show. If the guests saw the cunning behind my actions, they would fear me. They'd distrust me. That would make future collaborations impossible. So, despite the fact that I had already won, I remained the picture of sorrow, every movement steeped in quiet devastation. The plan had worked, but I still needed to play my part to the very end. That night the house was finally empty, the guests long gone. Frank sat slumped on the sofa, looking like he'd aged 10 years in a single evening. His carefully groomed beard was now disheveled, and his once pristine white trousers were crumpled, bearing the marks of his unraveling composure. The girl he cherished turned out to be a fraud. The child he planned to welcome wasn't even his. The wife he thought he had outsmarted had been several steps ahead all along. "As you wished," Frank muttered bitterly, taking a swig from his glass. The alcohol caught in his throat, triggering a fit of coughing that he couldn't control. For the first time I saw the full weight of his decline. He looked fragile, old. But that was no longer my concern. "Frank," I said softly, calling his name. That he froze and turned toward me, a faint glimmer of hope flickering in his eyes. That I knew exactly what he was hoping for. But he had used up his chances, every single one of them. "Let's get a divorce," I said calmly, stepping forward and placing the divorce papers I had prepared earlier onto the table in front of him. Frank's eyes locked onto the neatly bound documents. He reached for them, his trembling hands flipping through a few pages. As he read, his expression shifted from despair to fury. "20%? He hissed, his voice sharp with disbelief. "For the sake of the years we'd spent together, I had left him 20% of our shared assets." Frank's face contorted as he finished reading, his rage boiling over. He threw the papers onto the floor with a dramatic sweep of his hand. "Why? Why do I only get 20%? Gone was the polished, sophisticated man admired by so many. What sat before me now was someone unrecognizable, angry, desperate, and vulgar, like a bomb waiting to detonate. That I didn't answer his question. Instead I replied coolly, "Think about it." "There's nothing to think about," he roared. "This is non-negotiable." I didn't bother responding further. Whether or not he wanted to negotiate was irrelevant. Once it went to court, it wouldn't be up to him to decide. The next day Frank went to the bank, and then to the property registry, and then to his insurance agent. The division of assets is always the centerpiece of any divorce, and Frank was no exception. But no matter how many places he checked, the numbers would match exactly what I had included in the divorce agreement. He spent the entire day running from institution to institution, and by the end of it he had his answer. Yet he didn't contact me. He didn't come home, and he didn't go to Selena either. I didn't know where he was, but I had a good idea of what he was planning. He was trying to avoid me. Frank loved to play this game of vanishing when things didn't go his way. Meanwhile, Selena bombarded me with messages. There were insults, curses, pleas, attempts at reasoning. It was an endless stream of desperation. I ignored every single one of them. But buried in her barrage of messages were pieces of her true intentions. She was still clinging to the hope of getting the 300,000 I had promised. Her demands, her curses, her threats, they only revealed how little power she actually held. And I had no reason to answer her. Not anymore. Frank and I ultimately ended up in court. He was adamant about not divorcing, leaving me with no choice but to file again, knowing the process could drag out for another 6 months. But I had no intention of waiting that long. Most cases like this don't end in the courtroom, they're resolved outside it. So, the moment we stepped out of the courthouse, I played my trump card. Like Don Corleone in The Godfather. I made Frank an offer he couldn't refuse. I had compiled a split-screen video. On the top half was a clip of Frank and Selena's 10-minute escapade, crystal clear. On the bottom half, a longer, 30-minute session featuring Selena and David in the same bedroom, the contrast unmistakable. The video's title read, "Newspaper Editor's Infidelity Exposed. Mistress Turns to Another Lover in Dissatisfaction." I sent it to Frank. Frank watched the video, his face going pale as his body began to tremble with rage. His lawyer, noticing his reaction, leaned over to see what had caused such a violent response. Frank shoved him away before he could catch a glimpse. I watched the scene unfold with amusement. This lawyer wasn't particularly sharp, and based on what I'd seen, his skills were likely on par with someone earning half of Frank's salary, a perfect match for my earlier jab. "Settle this out of court," I said flatly. "You know what to do." Frank erupted into a string of expletives, his chest heaving as his hands shook uncontrollably. Destroying a man's pride has always followed the same formula, no matter the era. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked away, leaving him to stew in his humiliation. A month later, I was officially divorced. My ties to Frank were severed, and I was free at last. But the toll of the fight caught up with me. I fell gravely ill, my body and mind overwhelmed by the strain of tearing down the person who had caused me so much pain. It was, I realized, mutual destruction. A battle where no one walks away unscathed. After I recovered, I found myself looking at Selena's bank statement, the same one I'd once used to profile her. Without much deliberation, I transferred $300,000 into her account. It wasn't guilt, nor was it pity. It was a decision to hold on to a shred of humanity, a way to ensure my heart didn't turn completely cold. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that retaining even a flicker of compassion is essential. I needed to remind myself. Vengeance may bring resolution, but only empathy keeps the soul intact. Frank vanished from my life as quickly as the ink dried on the divorce papers. In the months that followed, I found myself in an unfamiliar calm, a silence that felt both liberating and eerie. My body bore the scars of the battle, and my mind replayed every move, every word exchanged in those final weeks. Winning didn't feel triumphant, it felt hollow. One evening, I sat by the window, the city lights reflecting off a glass of wine in my hand. On a whim, I checked Selena's account. She hadn't touched the $300,000 I'd sent her. Perhaps she didn't know how to respond to someone who had played her, exposed her, and yet left her with a lifeline. Or maybe she was too proud to use it. It didn't matter. For the first time in years, my future felt like it was mine alone, unburdened by Frank's betrayals, his ego, or his expectations. I turned away from the window and picked up the piano cover I hadn't touched in so long. My fingers found the keys, hesitant at first but then sure, playing a melody that wasn't haunted by memories. The music rose, filling the room not with triumph or regret, but with something better. Peace. Finally it was over.